Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the illusion of invincibility, so carefully crafted over decades, is now shattering under the weight of the law? And what if the second pillar of that myth, his claim to unmatched business competence, is collapsing at the very same time? For decades, a central narrative in American public life was meticulously crafted, hardened, and polished: the myth of Donald Trump as the untouchable winner. This was not merely a brand, it was a foundational persona, an identity built on the projection of absolute strength, unwavering dominance, and an almost supernatural ability to bend the rules of conventional reality. This carefully constructed image was the engine of his entire career, powering his rise from the concrete canyons of New York real estate through the casinos of Atlantic City and into the nation's living rooms via reality television, culminating in his ascent to the Oval Office. The persona was clear, consistent, and relentlessly marketed. He was the billionaire businessman who answered to no one, the strong man who always knew how to flip scandals into opportunities, and the outsider who could translate his personal relentless success into a national restoration. He painted himself as the living embodiment of a particular kind of American prosperity, a symbol of success for those who felt ignored. Every rally, every fiery speech, and every skyscraper bearing his name sent one clear message: Trump was a winner, and winners never lose. This illusion of invincibility, so carefully crafted over decades, is now shattering. The narrative is finally fractured, buckling under the combined weight of two distinct, simultaneous, and catastrophic crises. This is not a challenge on a single front. It is a full scale, two front siege, and it is attacking the very core of the myth. The first front is a legal and personal one, an unprecedented avalanche of legal battles that has buried him in litigation. With more than 90 lawsuits, multiple criminal charges, and an endless array of civil cases, this is a direct assault on his person, his family, and his business. It is a storm that threatens to hold the man himself accountable in a way that, for his entire public life, he had managed to avoid. The second front is an economic and political one, a self inflicted economic crisis reportedly worse than even the most pessimistic projections. This crisis is not the result of a natural business cycle, but of deliberate and destructive policy choices. It is a disaster that strikes at the other core pillar of his identity: his claim to unmatched business acumen and professional competence. These two crises are not parallel, they are convergent. The legal siege attacks the man's personal invincibility, while the economic collapse attacks his professional infallibility. Together, they are systematically dismantling the illusion, forcing a national reckoning with the reality behind the persona, and revealing the deep seated vulnerabilities that the myth was designed to conceal. What we are witnessing is not just a political downturn or a legal entanglement, it is the fundamental disintegration of the foundational myth that defined an era of American politics. Now, this first front of the assault is a legal storm of historic proportions. This is not, by any measure, just another political controversy. For a figure who built a career on navigating scandals, turning impeachments into political victories and controversies into headlines, this moment is fundamentally different. The situation has metastasized far beyond the realm of political theater and media spin. It is a full blown crisis, an avalanche of criminal charges, civil cases, and subpoenas that threatens the very foundation of his personal and political life. The sheer scale is staggering, with allegations ranging from complex financial fraud and the inflation of property values to unprecedented investigations into election interference. The legal heat has reached a level that no one, least of all him, could have fully predicted, and it is testing his famed resilience in an arena designed to neutralize his greatest strengths. The core of this crisis lies in the failure of his old playbook. The courtroom is not a campaign rally, and the rules of law are not the rules of television. For the first time, Trump is being forced to operate in a world where his usual tactics are rendered utterly ineffective. His entire public facing strategy has always rested on three pillars: distraction, delay, and deflection. He excelled at turning press interviews, rallies, and social media posts into tools of narrative control. He could deploy insults as weapons, twist evidence with bravado, and bow to no one. But inside a courtroom, this entire toolkit is obsolete. This new battlefield is one where bravado carries no weight. Evidence cannot be twisted by insults, and judges do not bow to nicknames or political theater. The maze of lawsuits forces him into an environment where he has lost control of the narrative, where his winning persona is irrelevant, and where he must answer to a system of rules he cannot bend. For his entire life, he portrayed himself as the man who could outmaneuver the system, but now that very system is pushing back with full, relentless force. This legal gauntlet, with its dozens of indictments and hearings, chips away at the myth with every filing. Each subpoena, every testimony, every judicial ruling is a crack in the carefully constructed shield of invincibility. It is a public and humiliating demonstration that the man who built his identity on being untouchable is, in fact, being touched, held, and questioned by the very institutions he once manipulated. This confrontation is absolute, and it is a battle his traditional arsenal was never designed to win. The illusion of the man who could never be touched is fading under the harsh fluorescent lights of the nation's courtrooms, and the question of his political and personal survival is no longer a rhetorical one. While the legal siege attacks the man, the second front attacks his mandate. The core premise of his political identity was that of the master businessman, the deal maker who understood the economy in a way no politician could. It is this premise that is now collapsing under the weight of what is being described as a self inflicted economic catastrophe, a crisis born from the bluntest, most economically destructive instrument available: broad based, aggressive tariff policy. The central driver of this economic wound is an average effective tariff rate of about 18%. To place this in its stark historical context, this is the highest that rate has been since 1933, the absolute depth of the Great Depression. We have nearly a century of economic data showing what happens when trade barriers of this magnitude are erected and the consequences are playing out in real time. This was a choice. Instead of targeted approaches such as subsidies or investment incentives to protect specific industries, the path chosen was one of broad based tariffs. This strategy is a direct echo of the 1930 Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, a policy decision widely credited by economists with deepening and prolonging the Great Depression. We are now unlearning that painful lesson, and the self inflicted wound is bleeding faster than anyone seems willing to acknowledge. The key indicators of this resulting recession are not ambiguous. They are alarming and comprehensive. First, the economy has begun to contract. We are now looking at a first quarter gross domestic product, GDP, contraction of negative 0.3%. While that number may seem modest, it represents the worst quarterly performance the economy has seen since 2022, and it is occurring at a time when growth, not contraction, should be the norm. Second, the job market, once a source of strength, has collapsed. The latest employment report showed that the economy added just 73,000 jobs, missing the forecast of 115,000 by nearly 50%. But the revisions to the previous month's data were even more devastating. May's numbers were revised down from 144,000 to just 19,000 jobs. June's numbers were revised from 147,000 to only 14,000. For two consecutive months, the economy experienced essentially flat employment growth, barely creating any jobs at all. Businesses, suffocated by tariff uncertainty, cannot predict their input costs or supply chain expenses. Research suggests this uncertainty alone has reduced monthly job creation by an estimated 100,000 positions, 100,000 people every month who are not finding work because of this policy induced fear. Third, inflation is soaring, inflicting the most immediate pain on average Americans. The annual inflation rate has climbed to 3%, significantly overshooting the Federal Reserve's 2% target and moving in the wrong direction. This is not an abstract statistic. For the typical American household, this translates to spending $1,043 more per month or $12,516 per year than they were at the start of 2021, just to maintain the exact same standard of living. This is the difference between making rent and facing eviction, between filling a gas tank or skipping errands, between buying fresh vegetables or cheaper processed foods. The tariffs are a direct contributor, acting as an inflationary tax on imported goods, with the costs passed directly to consumers. Fourth, the financial markets are in a state of unprecedented turmoil. This is not normal volatility, it is pure policy induced chaos. In one of the most surreal examples, a single social media post from the president erased approximately $2 trillion in value from the US stock market in one day. $2 trillion gone in hours. The market is now in bear territory. If it closes there, it would mark the earliest that a bull market has turned into a bear in a new administration in the entire history of the S&P 500, dating back to 1957. For anyone with retirement accounts, 401ks, or college savings plans, this is a direct and devastating depletion of their future wealth. Finally, this economic crisis is compounded by sheer government dysfunction. The nation is now in the longest government shutdown in modern American history, with no end in sight. Approximately 900,000 federal employees have been furloughed, and another 2 million are working without pay. The impact extends far beyond those workers. The Agriculture Department has notified states that it will not provide the $8 billion needed to fund SNAP benefits for November. This is the food assistance that 42 million Americans, including millions of children, rely on. This is not a political game. It is a humanitarian crisis unfolding in the wealthiest country in human history, born from an inability to perform the basic functions of government. But these two fronts, the legal and the economic, are not just convergent. They are locked in a vicious feedback loop, a downward spiral where each crisis accelerates and amplifies the other, creating a perfect storm of instability. The legal storm, for instance, is not just a personal problem, it is in itself a profound source of economic instability. Markets crave predictability. They thrive on order. But the unprecedented legal chaos surrounding the nation's chief executive signals the exact opposite. It signals to the world that the leader is distracted, compromised, and perpetually at war with his own government's institutions, including the judiciary and law enforcement. This isn't just tariff uncertainty, it is foundational leadership uncertainty. International partners and corporate investors see a leader fixated on personal survival, not on sound economic policy. This paralysis and perceived volatility chill investment, stall negotiations, and encourage allies to seek more reliable partners, directly exacerbating the economic damage. This is where the failure of his old playbook becomes so catastrophic. When he attempts to apply the same tactics of bravado and deflection to the legal system, attacking judges, prosecutors, and the rule of law itself, the effect is not defiance. It is pure, unadulterated chaos. The $2 trillion market wipe caused by a single social media post was not just a reaction to a bad policy idea, it was a terrified response to the behavioral instability of a leader under immense legal pressure. The legal crisis fuels his erratic behavior, and his erratic behavior poisons the economy. Conversely, the economic collapse strips him of the very armor he needed to fight the legal one. The myth of the master businessman was his primary shield, the core evidence for his claim to unique competence. It was the bargain he offered. Accept the chaotic style in exchange for unparalleled prosperity. Now, with inflation at 3%, job growth flatlining, and a recession looming, that bargain is broken. That shield is gone. He can no longer point to a rising stock market or low unemployment to dismiss the legal challenges as a witch hunt. The tangible daily economic pain felt by millions of Americans makes the public and even his own party far less tolerant of the personal chaos. This economic pain, from the price of gas to the threat of SNAP benefits disappearing, becomes a political accelerant. The humanitarian crisis of the government shutdown is a tangible kitchen table failure that cannot be spun. This makes his political allies, the donors and lawmakers he desperately needs, face a brutal choice. It is one thing to defend a leader on ideological grounds or against what can be framed as a political prosecution. It is another thing entirely to defend him while your own constituents cannot buy groceries, are furloughed from their jobs, or are watching their retirement savings evaporate. The economic failure, front two, makes it politically impossible for many to provide cover for the legal failures, front one, leaving him isolated and exposed. These two crises, the legal and the economic, are therefore not happening in a vacuum. They are the direct cause of a catastrophic collapse of the two pillars that held up the entire Trump persona, his financial empire and his political base. The first pillar to crumble is the myth of his endless wealth. This was always central to his political image, the billionaire who didn't need anyone, the successful businessman who would make America rich. That image is now collapsing. The astronomical legal costs are swallowing millions of dollars, draining funds that would normally fuel his political campaign. This financial squeeze is exposing a long suspected truth. The appearance of his financial empire was always far more fragile than he let on. The man who prided himself on being the self financed outsider is now leaning heavily on donors to keep both his legal defense and his political ambitions alive. This is not just an inconvenience, it is a profound symbolic failure. It shatters the illusion of independence. This legal pincer movement is exacerbated by the second front. The intense spotlight from investigations into inflated property values and questionable accounting is creating a storm that threatens contracts and partnerships. Lenders and investors who once lined up are now pulling back. The very empire that defined him as a symbol of power is buckling under the weight of its own fragility. As this illusion of endless wealth fades, so does the foundation of his credibility. The man who promised to make America rich is now fighting just to keep his own businesses afloat. The second pillar, his political base, is fracturing simultaneously. This is perhaps the most dangerous development. This erosion is happening on two levels, with the general public and within his own party. First, public support is cratering under the weight of the economic pain. The poll numbers are not abstract, they are a direct reflection of the lived experience of millions. His overall approval rating sits at a dismal 43%. But when drilled down to specific economic issues, the numbers are a verdict on his core promise. Only 34% of registered voters say he has lived up to expectations on the economy. Only 33% say he has looked out for the middle class. And just 30% say he has met expectations on inflation. In another poll, the numbers are even more stark. Over 63% of voters said he had fallen short on the economy. 65% said he'd fallen short on looking out for the middle class, and 66% said the same about his handling of the cost of living. These are not just bad numbers, they are a reflection of real economic pain and a total rejection of his central claim to competence. Second, and even more critically, the ironclad loyalty he once commanded over the Republican Party is beginning to fracture. For years, his grip was unshakable. But as his image of strength fades battered in court and proven incompetent on the economy, that loyalty is proving to be conditional. Behind closed doors, Republican figures who once defended him are voicing doubts. Donors who once wrote massive checks are now holding back, privately weighing whether he is still the party's strongest choice. The aura of inevitability that once froze all potential rivals is fading. This has given rise to the most telling sign, the rise of challengers from within his own ranks. Governors, senators, and even longtime allies who once stayed silent are now carefully stepping into the spotlight. They are testing the waters, positioning themselves as the new face of Republican leadership. They see an opening. They are quietly preparing for a life after Trump. This shift represents the biggest danger of all. Political loyalty depends on the perception of strength and the ability to win. As his legal and economic burdens grow, that perception is evaporating. The support that once looked like solid rock is beginning to crumble. This is confirmed by the verdict of the business community, the very people he claimed to represent. In a recent survey, CEOs described the tariff policies with unvarnished contempt, calling them disappointingly stupid and illogical. These are not partisan voices. This is the verdict of the business community. They are openly warning that this is the Trump recession and that the United States is rapidly losing its credibility as a reliable economic partner. When he has lost the public, the party, and the business world, the pillars of his power are gone. The collapse of this carefully built image, brought on by the combined weight of his legal and economic troubles, cannot be separated from the bigger picture. This is not just about one man's future. It is about the direction of American politics as a whole. From the beginning, Donald Trump was more than a candidate. He was a symbol. He represented a fight against a broken system, a voice for those who felt left behind by globalization and an unresponsive government. His rise was fueled by a deep and legitimate anger, frustration, and distrust in institutions. Now, as he finds himself buried under lawsuits and the consequences of his own disastrous economic policies, his struggles have become a reflection of something much larger: America's deep divisions, its fragile economy, and its crumbling faith in leadership. His downfall, if it comes, is not just the end of his personal empire. It is a spotlight on the very fractures that allowed him to rise. The polarization of America is now visible in real time. Every indictment, every courtroom hearing, every economic report is filtered through two opposite lenses. To his loyal supporters, the legal system is a weaponized tool, proof that the establishment is corrupt. To his critics, the charges are long overdue justice, proof that no one is above the law. The same events are seen through completely different perspectives, a mirror of just how divided the nation has become. This era has served as a profound stress test for American institutions, both democratic and economic. On the Democratic front, his tenure has relentlessly attacked the judiciary, the free press, and the electoral process itself. A conviction, as C.S. Lewis might say, would depend on where you sit. It could be hailed as a reaffirmation of the rule of law, proof that the system, though strained, ultimately held. But for his millions of followers, it would be seen as the ultimate betrayal, a deep state coup that validates their deepest suspicions. This scenario risks further entrenching an entire segment of the population in permanent opposition to federal authority. Conversely, if he navigates these legal perils and returns to power, it would signal that the traditional guardrails of American democracy are weaker than ever imagined. On the economic front, his policies are actively dismantling the post World War II economic order. The system of global trade, built on agreements like Bretton Woods and the World Trade Organization, an American led system that created decades of prosperity, is being torn apart. This abandonment of trade agreements and the policy induced chaos of his tariffs are forcing other countries to make long term plans that do not include relying on the American market. These new trade relationships, forged in our absence, will have permanent, long term consequences. Within this reckoning, the Republican Party faces an existential identity crisis. For years, the party remade itself in his image. His potential political neutralization will create a brutal power vacuum, and an inevitable civil war within the GOP seems almost certain. This war will pit the populist, nationalist MAGA base against an establishment eager to reclaim control. The populist energy he harnessed will not simply vanish, it will seek a new and perhaps more disciplined vessel. Ultimately, the most profound legacy of this era may be psychological. Trump's rise was fueled by a narrative of grievance and a promise of restoration. The unraveling of his strongman image, The disintegration of his myth of invincibility creates a profound narrative void. What story will America tell itself next? Will it be one of healing and reconciliation, an effort to bridge the chasm of partisan hatred, or will the nation splinter into competing narratives, each with its own set of facts, heroes, and villains? The answer depends on whether new leaders can emerge who offer a compelling vision of a shared future. The end of this saga will not close a chapter in American history, it will open a new, uncertain one. The story was never just about one man's invincibility. It has always been about a nation's vulnerability and its desperate, uncertain search for a path forward.